If you're here right now, this separation isn't just something that happened to you. It's something you're still feeling in your chest, in the quiet moments, in the questions you can't stop asking at night. Aquarius, this connection was real. And the pain you're carrying is real too. But what if this distance isn't a mistake and isn't a loss? What if it had to happen to wake you up to something deeper within yourself? Before we go any further, take a breath, and if this resonates, comment below. I'm open to understanding this. Because in the next moments, we're not just talking about a separation, we're stepping into the reason behind it. And it may change how you see everything. You know, there are connections that don't arrive loudly. They don't rush in. They don't need to prove themselves. They simply feel familiar, from the very beginning. And that's how this one felt for you. Not dramatic, not chaotic at first, just real. Like something in your body recognized it before your mind could catch up. You didn't imagine this. This wasn't wishful thinking. This connection mattered deeply. It touched places inside you that most people never reach. Emotionally, energetically, on a soul level you don't always have words for. That's why it hurts the way it does. If it had been shallow, you would have moved on by now. But you didn't. Because this wasn't surface level love. This was resonance. Two inner worlds noticing each other, and yet something never quite settled. There was warmth, but also tension. Closeness, but also a subtle feeling of holding your breath, like both of you were leaning in while quietly bracing for impact. Aquarius, you sensed it even during the good moments. That quiet knowing that something beautiful was happening, but something essential was still missing. Not love, not attraction, readiness. You were meeting each other before both of you had fully met yourselves. And no one talks enough about how painful that is. Because when love arrives early, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It means it's unfinished. Both of you were still becoming. Still shedding older versions. Still carrying wounds that hadn't been named yet. And instead of growing side by side, something began to pull. Subtle at first, then stronger. Not because the bond wasn't strong enough, but because the weight became too much for the versions of you that were showing up then. That's when the distance began. And I know how confusing that was. Because love was still there, care was still there. So your mind kept asking, why would something real need to break apart? But your body already knew the answer. You felt it in the pauses, in the unsaid words, in the moments where staying together started to cost you pieces of yourself. And that realization quietly broke your heart. Because loving someone should not require disappearing inside the connection. That moment when it finally ended, or when the space became undeniable, a part of you whispered something you didn't want to hear. This had to happen. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because it was. Because something this real cannot survive on half-healed ground. And you didn't imagine that knowing either. It lived in your chest long before your mind accepted it. That deep inner pause, that heavy breath, that quiet acceptance mixed with grief. And as painful as it was, it also carried a strange clarity, like standing at the edge of something vast, not knowing what's next, but knowing you can't go back the same way. So stay with me here. Because what follows this kind of connection is not emptiness, it's movement. And something within you is already beginning to respond. If you're here right now, this separation isn't just something that happened to you. It's something you're still feeling in your chest, in the quiet moments, in the questions you can't stop asking at night. Aquarius, this connection was real. And the pain you're carrying is real too. But what if this distance isn't a mistake and isn't a loss? What if it had to happen to wake you up to something deeper within yourself? Before we go any further, take a breath, and if this resonates, comment below. I'm open to understanding this. Because in the next moments, we're not just talking about a separation, we're stepping into the reason behind it. And it may change how you see everything. You know, there are connections that don't arrive loudly. They don't rush in. They don't need to prove themselves. They simply feel familiar, from the very beginning. And that's how this one felt for you. Not dramatic, not chaotic at first, just real. Like something in your body recognized it before your mind could catch up. You didn't imagine this. This wasn't wishful thinking. This connection mattered deeply. It touched places inside you that most people never reach. Emotionally, energetically, on a soul level you don't always have words for. That's why it hurts the way it does. If it had been shallow, you would have moved on by now. But you didn't. Because this wasn't surface level love. This was resonance. Two inner worlds noticing each other, and yet something never quite settled. There was warmth, but also tension. Closeness, but also a subtle feeling of holding your breath, like both of you were leaning in while quietly bracing for impact. Aquarius, you sensed it even during the good moments. That quiet knowing that something beautiful was happening, but something essential was still missing. Not love, not attraction, readiness. You were meeting each other before both of you had fully met yourselves. And no one talks enough about how painful that is. Because when love arrives early, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It means it's unfinished. Both of you were still becoming. Still shedding older versions. Still carrying wounds that hadn't been named yet. And instead of growing side by side, something began to pull. Subtle at first, then stronger. Not because the bond wasn't strong enough, but because the weight became too much for the versions of you that were showing up then. That's when the distance began. And I know how confusing that was. Because love was still there, care was still there. So your mind kept asking, why would something real need to break apart? But your body already knew the answer. You felt it in the pauses, in the unsaid words, in the moments where staying together started to cost you pieces of yourself. And that realization quietly broke your heart. Because loving someone should not require disappearing inside the connection. That moment when it finally ended, or when the space became undeniable, a part of you whispered something you didn't want to hear. This had to happen. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because it was. Because something this real cannot survive on half-healed ground. And you didn't imagine that knowing either. It lived in your chest long before your mind accepted it. That deep inner pause, that heavy breath. That quiet acceptance mixed with grief. And as painful as it was, it also carried a strange clarity. Like standing at the edge of something vast, not knowing what's next, but knowing you can't go back the same way. So stay with me here. Because what follows this kind of connection is not emptiness. It's movement. And something within you is already beginning to respond. And here is the part most people avoid talking about. Not because it isn't important, but because it's uncomfortable. Because when we look at it honestly, we have to stop romanticizing the pain and start listening to what it was trying to say. You felt it, didn't you? That subtle shift. When love slowly stopped feeling like freedom and began to feel like effort. Not the healthy kind of effort, but the kind that tightens your chest. Where conversations felt heavier. Silence felt louder. Where you started thinking before you spoke. Adjusting before you chose. Trying to keep the connection steady by holding yourself just a little smaller. At first it looked like care. Checking in. Staying close. Wanting reassurance. But somewhere along the way it quietly turned into watching. Measuring. Waiting. One step forward. One step back. Pulling close. Then pulling away. Not because either of you wanted control, but because neither of you felt fully safe yet. And when safety is missing, even love starts reaching with tension in its hands. There was also that unspoken role you slipped into. Trying to help. Trying to guide. Trying to fix what hurt in them. And maybe they did the same with you. Two people standing face to face, both reaching out, both quietly hoping the other would make it easier to breathe. But partnership is not rescue. And love was never meant to feel like supervision. Somewhere in that dynamic, your own voice softened. Your edges blurred. You began to compromise things you didn't even realize you were giving up. Little by little. Until one day, you couldn't tell where you ended and the relationship began. That's when something inside you resisted. Not loudly. Just a quiet inner push. A sense that continuing this way would cost you something essential. And that was never the purpose of love. Because the truth is, no connection can stay alive when it asks one or both people to abandon themselves. That's not growth. That's erosion. And if it had continued like that, the pain wouldn't have disappeared. It would have only changed form. Resentment. Emotional exhaustion. A deeper sense of being unseen. Ending it or allowing the distance wasn't giving up. It was interruption. A necessary pause before the same lesson repeated louder. Aquarius, you didn't fail here. You noticed something wasn't aligned and your soul refused to ignore it. That awareness, as painful as it felt, was already an act of self-respect. And now that space exists not to punish you, but to return something to you. Your clarity. Your center. Your ability to feel whole again without holding the relationship together with your hands. Sit with that for a moment. Because when the noise settles and the pushing stops, something quieter begins to speak. And it has been waiting for your full attention. And then something shifted. Not on the outside at first, but inside you. It didn't arrive with answers. It arrived with discomfort. The kind that sits quietly. The kind you can't distract yourself from. This separation wasn't just distance between two people. It was distance between who you had been and who you were no longer able to pretend to be. That's why it hurt in a different way. Not sharp, not sudden, but deep. Persistent? Like something old was loosening its grip, even though part of you still wanted to hold on. You may have tried to tell yourself this was just bad timing, just circumstances, just life being unfair. But Aquarius, your soul knew better. This wasn't random. This was an ending that arrived because a beginning was already forming inside you. Pain has a strange intelligence. It doesn't show up to destroy. It shows up to interrupt patterns that can no longer carry your future. And that is exactly what this did. Long enough to feel what you had been overriding. Long enough to notice where you had been bending instead of standing. Where you had been adapting instead of being authentic. This separation didn't ask you to suffer, it asked you to wake up. To the ways you had been loving from old wounds. To the ways you had been hoping instead of choosing. To the ways you had been waiting instead of trusting yourself. That awareness is not gentle at first. It shakes things loose. Expectations. Stories that once felt comforting. Aquarius energy does this beautifully and mercilessly. It clears the fog. It refuses to keep believing what no longer aligns with truth. Even when truth costs something. Even when truth breaks your heart open. Because once you see clearly, you can no longer go back to pretending you don't. And maybe that's why this space feels so intense. There's grief here. Yes. But there's also light. Moments of clarity. Moments where you suddenly realize you can breathe differently now. Where your thoughts slow down. Where your body feels less braced. Where a quiet question begins to rise. What if this pain is shaping me instead of punishing me? What if this ending is protecting a version of me I haven't fully met yet? That question matters. Because awakening doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with honesty, with the willingness to stop lying to yourself about what was sustainable and what was simply familiar. You didn't lose yourself here. You found the moment where losing yourself was no longer an option. And that is not weakness. That is the beginning of integrity. Stay with that feeling, the stillness beneath the grief. Because something within you is adjusting, reorienting, learning how to stand again without leaning on what could not hold you. And in that quiet recalibration, something important is taking shape. Not loudly, not urgently, but steadily, like a truth that finally has room to breathe. There is something else you need to hear. And I want you to hear it gently, because your heart has been carrying a story that may not be completely yours. You've probably wondered over and over again what changed inside them. What you missed. What you could have done differently. But the truth is, they didn't step away because love disappeared. They stepped away because their inner world became too heavy to manage. What they were facing was not simple. It wasn't a single problem or a single decision. It was pressure building quietly. From places they hadn't healed yet. Responsibilities stacking up. Expectations closing in. Old pain resurfacing at the worst possible moment. And when someone is overwhelmed like that, even love begins to feel like another demand. Not because it is, but because their nervous system can't tell the difference anymore. They didn't know how to show up without breaking themselves further. And they knew deep down they could not give you what you deserve from that place. That realization alone can be devastating. Because it carries shame. The kind that makes someone withdraw instead of explaining. The kind that says, if I stay, I might hurt you more. So they chose distance as a form of damage control. Not a clean choice. Not a brave one. But the only one they could reach at the time. I know it's hard not to take that personally. When someone pulls away, it feels like rejection. But sometimes it's self-preservation. They were dealing with things they didn't have language for yet. Losses they hadn't processed. Fears they hadn't admitted. Old wounds that reopened under pressure. And when those things surface, they don't ask permission. They take over. That doesn't mean you weren't important. It means you were important at the wrong moment for someone who wasn't ready to be present. There is a quiet sadness in that. Because love was there, but capacity was not. And those two things are not the same. You couldn't have fixed this. You couldn't have loved them into clarity. This was not about effort. It was about timing and inner readiness and the courage to face one's own truth. Something they are still learning how to do. If you listen closely now, you may feel a subtle release in your chest. Not relief, but understanding. The kind that softens self-blame. The kind that lets you exhale without needing answers from them. Because their journey was colliding with yours, not aligning with it. And as painful as that was, it prevented you from carrying weight that was never meant to be yours. Sit with that awareness for a moment. Notice how your body responds when you stop assuming you were the reason they left. There is space there, and within that space, something steadier begins to emerge. Not about them, about you. About what this pause has quietly been making room for all along. There is a weight they carry that you may never have seen directly. Because guilt rarely announces itself. It hides, it lowers the eyes, it shortens the replies. It creates distance where honesty feels too exposed. When they think of you, it is not neutral. There is warmth there, yes. But it is tangled with something heavier. The feeling of not being enough, not strong enough, not healed enough, not whole enough to stand in front of you without flinching. That realization hurts in a quiet way. Because guilt doesn't scream, it withdraws. It says, if I stay, you will see the parts of me I am trying desperately to avoid. And so they choose absence over being seen. Not because you asked for perfection, but because your presence reflects their unfinished work back to them. And that reflection feels unbearable. Especially when there are things they haven't let go of yet. Old attachments, unresolved choices, patterns they know no longer fit but don't yet know how to release. Avoidance becomes a shield, a way to delay the moment they must sit alone with their own truth. An Aquarius that has nothing to do with your worth. You didn't intimidate them by being too much. You reminded them of what they hadn't become yet. There is a difference. Still, I know how painful that feels, because when someone avoids you, it feels like erasure, like being quietly dismissed. But what was actually happening was something far more fragile. They were protecting themselves from the shame of disappointing you, from the fear of being seen clearly and found lacking in their own eyes. And so they stayed silent. They stayed distant. Not because love vanished, but because courage hadn't arrived yet. That silence was never meant to punish you. It was a sign of someone who did not know how to face themselves without falling apart. And that is not something you could have fixed, no matter how gently you loved them. You could not have walked this part for them. This was an internal crossing only they could make. If you pause now and really feel into this, you may notice something soften inside you. A release of responsibility. A quiet permission to stop carrying explanations that were never yours to hold. Because their avoidance was not a verdict on you. It was a mirror they weren't ready to look into. And mirrors can be terrifying when we are not prepared to change. Let that truth settle. Not to excuse the pain, but to free yourself from it. You don't need their clarity to honor your own. You don't need their courage to keep moving forward. Because something has already shifted within you. A subtle strength. A steadiness that does not chase or justify or wait in confusion. Just a calm knowing that whatever was meant to meet you will not require you to disappear to be loved. And as this understanding lands, something inside you begins to stand taller, not in defiance, in dignity, in readiness for what feels lighter and more honest than what you've just laid down. And now this is where the meaning of the distance begins to change. Because what looks like emptiness on the surface is actually space. And space is not punishment, it is invitation. This distance did not arrive to make you wait. It arrived to give something back to you that may have been slowly leaking away. Your energy, your attention, your sense of self. For a long time, your emotional world may have been orbiting another person. Their mood, their availability, their choices. You felt alive when they leaned in, and unsteady when they pulled back. That rhythm quietly trained your nervous system to place your peace outside of yourself. And that is exhausting. This pause is not asking you to monitor the silence. It is asking you to stop chasing it, to stop checking, to stop interpreting, to stop holding your breath for signs. Because every moment spent watching the door is a moment you are not inhabiting your own life. Aquarius, this space is here to return your center to you, not through force, but through absence. When someone steps back and you do not rush to fill the gap, something powerful happens. You begin to feel yourself again. Your thoughts slow, your emotions settle. You remember what it feels like to exist without needing permission to be okay. This is not about becoming cold or detached. It is about becoming sovereign, about remembering that your happiness was never meant to be outsourced. If someone's presence is the sole source of your joy, then your inner world is always at risk. And that is not love. That is vulnerability without grounding. This distance is quietly teaching you how to self-regulate, how to sit with longing without letting it define you, how to feel pain without letting it collapse you, how to stay open without abandoning yourself. There is strength forming here, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that says, I can miss you and still choose myself. I can love deeply without disappearing. I can stand alone without feeling incomplete. Notice what begins to happen when you stop directing all that energy outward. Ideas return. Desires surface. Parts of you that went dormant start stretching awake again. This is not regression, it is reclamation. You are not losing anything real here, you are retrieving yourself. And that is the greatest gift any separation can offer. Sit with that truth. Let it settle into your body. Because when your happiness is rooted inside you, nothing outside of you has the power to destabilize your worth. And from that grounded place, your future connections will feel different, lighter, more mutual, more honest. As you rest in the space, something begins to rearrange naturally. No forcing, no chasing. Just alignment quietly taking shape in the background of your becoming. And you may not see it yet, but you are already standing closer to yourself than you have in a long time. And that closeness is preparing you for a different way of loving. And this is where the work becomes intimate, not loud, not performative, quiet, personal. Because once the noise fades and the space settles, certain feelings rise to the surface, asking to be acknowledged, not judged, not fixed, just seen. You may notice a familiar ache. The fear that whispers, what if I am left again? Not abandoned loudly, but quietly, the way it hurts the most. That fear did not begin here. This connection only touched it. Jealousy may have visited too. Not because you wanted control, but because uncertainty made your body tense. When safety feels fragile, the mind looks for anchors. And sometimes it grips instead of trusts. There is also that subtle sense of not being enough. The way you questioned yourself, wondered if loving harder, being calmer, or needing less would have changed the outcome. That voice is not truth. It is a wound asking for reassurance. And dependence, that quiet leaning on another person to regulate your emotional world, did not come from weakness. It came from longing to feel secure, to feel chosen, to feel held without having to ask. Your trust has been stretched, maybe cracked in places. And now all of that is asking for your attention. Not all at once. Gently. Like an inner child tugging at your sleeve saying, "Are you here with me now?" This is the invitation. To turn inward without disappearing. To sit with yourself without distraction. To learn how to soothe your own nervous system instead of waiting for someone else to do it for you. It starts simply with noticing the breath, the tension in your chest, the moment your thoughts spiral, and choosing again and again to stay present. This is how you build safety inside, not by forcing strength but by offering consistency. Showing up for yourself even on the days you feel unsteady. You begin to reparent those wounded parts. The ones who feared being left. The ones who learned early that love might disappear. You teach them something new now. I am here. I am staying. Over time, your emotions become less overwhelming. They move through you instead of running you. You respond instead of react, and a sense of calm authority returns. Not cold, grounded. This is healing that cannot be rushed. But it is powerful, because it changes the foundation from which you love. You stop reaching from emptiness. You begin offering connection from fullness. And something remarkable happens then. Your standards shift. Your boundaries feel natural. Your heart stays open without feeling exposed. You no longer chase reassurance. You recognize alignment. This inner home you are building quietly becomes your refuge, a place where you can rest without needing validation. And as that home strengthens, the world responds differently to you. Not because you demand more, but because you no longer accept less. Stay with this feeling. This calm steadiness growing beneath the surface. Because it is not just healing your past. It is shaping the way you will love and be loved from here on. And now let's talk about the meaning of all this. Because pain like this does not arrive without purpose. It never has. It doesn't show up to ruin you. It shows up to interrupt a future that would have kept repeating the same wound in different faces, different seasons, different stories. If nothing changed here, if you simply moved on without turning inward, this pattern would find you again. Maybe softer, maybe louder, but familiar. That is how unhealed lessons work. They circle back until they are met with awareness. And you right now are standing at that meeting point. This pain asked you a question, not why did this happen to me, but who am I becoming because of it? That question matters. Because the moment you choose to engage with it, everything begins to shift. Choosing healing is not about erasing the past. It is about integrating it. Choosing maturity is not about hardening your heart. It is about strengthening your boundaries without closing your spirit. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It is foundational. When you choose yourself, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You stop mistaking potential for presence. You begin to recognize what feels steady instead of what feels familiar. And slowly, almost quietly, a new version of you steps forward. Not louder, just clearer, more grounded in your body, more honest with your needs, less willing to shrink to keep connection alive. This version of you does not chase love. They align with it. They don't ask to be chosen. They recognize when something chooses them back. And from that place, love feels different. It feels mutual. It feels safe without being boring. It feels expansive without being destabilizing. Whether it is with the same person or someone entirely new, the quality changes because you have changed. That is the real gift hidden inside this pain. Not the ending, the refinement. You are not walking away from love. You are walking toward a healthier expression of it. One that does not ask you to abandon your center or silence your intuition or wait in confusion. As this realization settles, notice how your body responds. The shoulders drop. The breath deepens. There is grief still, yes, but there is also relief. Because now you understand. This separation was not a mistake. It was a course correction. One that honors the person you are becoming. And you don't need to rush to see how it all unfolds. You only need to keep choosing yourself with honesty, with patience, with compassion. The rest will meet you when you are ready. And you are closer than you think. And before we close this space tonight, I want you to pause for just a moment. Because if you're still here, listening all the way to the end, it means something inside you already shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, in a way that matters. This separation didn't weaken you. It refined you. It stripped away what was never aligned and left you standing closer to your own truth than you've been in a long time. And that's not an accident. Aquarius energy doesn't come to keep you comfortable. It comes to wake you up. To remind you that you are not here to repeat old cycles. or to earn love by shrinking, or to wait for clarity that can only come from within. You were never meant to lose yourself inside someone else's becoming. You were meant to meet yourself right here. So if this message found you tonight, let it land, let it settle into your bones. And if you feel called, leave a comment below and simply say, I choose myself, not as a declaration to the world, but as a quiet promise to you. And if you want to keep walking this path together, subscribe and stay close. This space is for those who are healing honestly, loving consciously, and learning how to trust their own inner voice again. Because this is not the end of the journey. This is a recalibration. And there are more messages coming, more clarity, more alignment. You don't have to rush. You don't have to chase. Just keep listening to what feels true. You're exactly where you need to be. And the next part of your story is already finding its way to you.